When we moved into the new house, I felt both excited and nervous. The house was old, with big windows and a garden full of overgrown plants. Mark said it was perfect for a fresh start. I smiled and agreed, but something about the house felt strange. It was very quiet, even when the wind blew through the trees. The walls seemed thick, like they were holding secrets. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The bedroom was cold, even though it was summer. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Mark snored softly beside me. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was like a soft whisper, too quiet to understand. I sat up and listened carefully, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I explored the house while unpacking our things. The rooms were empty and plain, with old wooden floors that creaked when I walked. In the corner of the living room, I saw a crack in the wall. It looked like someone had tried to hide it with paint. I touched the crack, and for a moment, I thought I heard the whisper again. It sent a chill down my spine, but I laughed it off and kept unpacking. That evening, while Mark was out running errands, the house felt colder. I was in the bedroom putting clothes away when I heard the whisper again. This time, it was louder. It sounded like my name, Emma. My heart started to race. I looked around the room, but there was no one there. The sound seemed to be coming from the wall near the bed. I leaned closer to the wall, and my hands touched something strange. The wood felt loose like a hidden panel. I pushed it gently, and the panel popped open. Behind it was a small space just big enough to hold something. Inside, there was an old photo. My hands shook as I pulled the photo out and looked at it. It was Mark. He was smiling with his arm around another woman. They were standing in front of a small house with two children playing in the background. I stared at the photo, confused and scared. Who was this woman? Who were these children? When Mark came home, I quickly hid the photo in my drawer. My mind raced with questions. Could this be an old picture from before we met? But why would it be hidden in the wall? And why didn't Mark ever tell me about it? I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The whisper came back, louder than before. This time, it didn't just say my name. It sounded like it was trying to tell me something, but the words were hard to understand. I felt scared, but also curious. I needed to know what the whispers wanted me to find. The next morning, I decided to look around the house more carefully. I checked the attic, the basement, and the closets. I opened every drawer and cabinet, hoping to find some explanation. But all I found were more questions. In the basement, I discovered a box of old papers. Most of them were useless, like bills and receipts, but one receipt caught my eye. It was from a jewelry store. The date was just 6 months ago, and it was for an expensive necklace. I didn't own a necklace like that. My hands started to shake again. I put the receipt back in the box and closed it quickly. When Mark came home that evening, he acted normal, smiling and asking about my day. I tried to act normal too, but inside, I felt like I was falling apart. The whispers had shown me something, and now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house felt colder and darker as the days went on. The whispers came every night, always calling my name. Emma, Emma. Sometimes they were soft and sad. Other times, they were sharp, like a warning. I didn't know if I was imagining them, but I couldn't ignore them anymore. One evening, as I stood in the bedroom, I heard the whisper again. It led me to a corner of the room where the floorboards creaked under my feet. I knelt down and tapped on the wood. It sounded hollow. My heart raced as I pried the board loose. Beneath it, I found another hidden space. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon. I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was addressed to someone named Clara. The handwriting was Mark's. The letter talked about love and promises, but it wasn't written to me. Tears filled my eyes as I read more of the letters. They all spoke of a life Mark had kept hidden from me, a life with Clara. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent, as if they were telling me to keep going. I stopped reading and put the letters back. My mind was spinning. I couldn't believe what I had found. Mark had a secret, and the house was trying to show me the truth. The next day, I couldn't look at Mark the same way. He smiled and talked like everything was normal, but I knew better now. The house knew too. It whispered to me, guiding me to the truth piece by piece. I didn't know what to do next. Should I confront Mark? Should I keep looking for answers? The whispers seemed to tell me there was more to find, but I was scared of what I might uncover. The house was no longer just a place to live. It felt alive, watching me, protecting me, and revealing the secrets I wasn't ready to face. The days felt heavier after I found the letters. Every time I looked at Mark, my stomach turned. He still smiled and kissed me before he left for work, but I could not return the warmth. I kept the letters hidden, but their words haunted me. The whispers came at night, pulling me closer to the truth. I started noticing the little things. Mark's late nights suddenly made sense. He often came home smelling of perfume, a soft floral scent that wasn't mine. His phone would buzz and he'd turn away, typing quickly. Before, I thought it was work. Now, I wasn't so sure. The house grew colder each day. I felt like it was watching me. The whispers were louder, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the dead of night. Emma, they called, always in that same haunting tone. One night, as I lay in bed, the whispers became clear again. They pulled me out of sleep, leading me to the living room. I stood in the dark, feeling a strange pull toward the fireplace. My hands moved over the bricks, and one felt loose. My heart raced as I pried it free. Behind it was a small box. I opened it carefully. Inside was a piece of paper with a woman's name and a phone number. The name was Clara. The whispers stopped for a moment, as if waiting for me to understand. Clara, the woman from the letters. My hands shook as I held the paper. I didn't know if I could call her, but I couldn't leave it here either. I took the paper and put it in my drawer with the photo and letters. The house didn't let me rest. The next day, I felt uneasy, like something big was coming. While cleaning the kitchen, I noticed a key hanging on a nail under the counter. It wasn't for any door in the house. My hands trembled as I took it. The whispers seemed to hum around me, like they were telling me to follow. I went to the basement with the key in my hand. It felt colder than before, the air thick and heavy. In the corner of the room was an old cabinet I hadn't paid much attention to. It was locked. My heart pounded as I tried the key. It clicked open. Inside was a pile of papers. At first, they seemed normal, old bills, receipts, and documents. But as I dug deeper, I found a small notebook. I opened it and saw Mark's handwriting. It wasn't just any notebook. It was full of schedules, dates, and names. One name appeared over and over again: Clara. The dates matched the nights Mark said he was working late. There were details like hotel addresses and small notes. My head spun. It wasn't just a mistake or a one-time thing. Mark had been planning this for a long time. I closed the notebook and sat on the basement floor, my hands shaking. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to cry. The whispers came again, soft and steady. Emma, they called, almost comforting. I stayed there for a long time, feeling the cold air surround me. That evening, Mark came home early. He acted like nothing was wrong, asking about dinner and talking about his day. I forced myself to smile and nod, but my mind was far away. I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. The whispers were right. There was more to find. That night, the whispers returned, louder than before. They guided me back to the bedroom. This time, they led me to the closet. I searched through Mark's clothes, feeling the fabric with trembling hands. In the pocket of one of his jackets, I found a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt for a weekend trip to a nearby town. The date was just 2 weeks ago. My heart sank as I read the details. It was for a fancy hotel, one we had never visited together. I knew it wasn't for me. I sat on the floor of the closet, staring at the paper. The whispers were quiet now, as if they knew I had found enough. My head felt heavy, and my chest ached. Mark was living a life I knew nothing about. The house seemed darker than ever that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The photo, the letters, the notebook, the receipt, they all painted a clear picture. Mark was not the man I thought he was. I didn't know what to do next. Should I confront him? Should I call Clara? The whispers had shown me the truth, but they didn't tell me what to do with it. I felt trapped, scared, and angry. The house had become both my ally and my prison. I knew one thing for sure: the secrets were not over. There was more to uncover, and the house would guide me. I just didn't know if I was ready to face what came next. The next morning, the house felt heavier. The air was colder, and the shadows on the walls seemed darker. I couldn't escape the weight in my chest. The secrets I had found were too much to carry, but the whispers seemed to push me forward. They didn't let me stop. Mark left early that day, saying he had to be at work. I watched him leave from the window, my hands gripping the edge of the table. As soon as the car disappeared down the street, I turned back to the house. I knew there was more to find. The whispers had been right before, and I trusted them now. I went back to the bedroom. The closet where I had found the receipt still felt strange to me. The whispers hummed softly as I stepped inside, their sound rising and falling like a quiet warning. I pushed the clothes aside and searched the shelves. My fingers brushed against something sharp. It was a small metal box hidden in the back corner of the shelf. The lock on it was old and rusty, but it opened easily. Inside, I found a stack of photos. My breath caught as I looked at them. They were of Mark and Clara. The photos showed them together at a park, holding hands, laughing. There was one of Clara sitting on a bench with two children. She looked happy, her arm around the smallest child. In another photo, Mark was holding the hand of the older child, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. My heart felt heavy as I flipped through the photos. They were not from years ago. The clothes, the settings, even the children's faces. They were recent. My chest tightened as I realized Mark was living two lives. He was not just lying to me. He had a family, a whole other world I knew nothing about. I sat on the bed, holding the photos in my lap. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a strange, cold energy. It was as if they were asking me what I would do now. My hands trembled as I placed the photos back in the box. I couldn't think clearly. My head spun with questions. How long had this been going on? Did he ever love me? Or was I just part of his lie? The whispers seemed to echo my thoughts, circling around me like a storm. Later that afternoon, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't stay in the house any longer, waiting for the whispers to guide me. I had to see the truth for myself. I remembered the receipt I had found, the one from a hotel in the nearby town. I left the house quickly, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag. The whispers followed me as I walked to the car, their sound faint but steady. I felt them urging me on, telling me I was doing the right thing. The drive to the hotel felt long, even though it wasn't far. My mind raced with possibilities. What if I saw Mark there? What if I saw Clara? My stomach churned, but I couldn't turn back. The whispers had brought me this far, and I needed to know the truth. When I arrived, the hotel looked quiet and ordinary. I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the building. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt the whispers pushing me forward. I got out of the car and walked to the lobby. The air inside was warm, but it did nothing to calm the chill I felt in my chest. I didn't ask any questions. Instead, I wandered through the halls, looking for something, anything, that would give me a clue. On the second floor, I heard a familiar sound. It was Mark's voice, low and calm, coming from one of the rooms. My heart stopped as I froze in place, listening. The door was slightly open and I could see inside. Mark was sitting on the bed with Clara. She was smiling, her hand resting on his arm. The two children were on the floor, playing with toys. The scene looked peaceful, like a picture of a happy family. My stomach turned as I watched. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The whispers were louder now, almost screaming in my ears. I couldn't stay there. I turned and ran down the hall, my feet moving faster than my thoughts. Back in the car, I sat in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt empty, like the truth had taken something from me that I could never get back. The drive home was a blur. The whispers were quiet now, as if they knew I had seen enough. When I got back to the house, it felt colder than ever. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air heavy with the weight of what I had just discovered. I sat in the living room, staring at the photos and letters I had collected. The whispers began again, soft and steady, like a sad psalm. They seemed to ask me the same question over and over. What will you do now? I didn't know the answer. My world felt broken, and I wasn't sure how to put the pieces back together. But one thing was clear: I couldn't live like this anymore. The truth was out, and I had to decide what came next. The days after seeing Mark at the hotel passed in a strange blur. The house felt quieter now, though the whispers came and went. They were softer, less insistent, but they stayed with me like they were watching and waiting. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The picture of Mark with Clara and her children replayed in my mind like a bad dream. I tried to go about my days as if nothing had happened. I cleaned the house, prepared meals, and folded the laundry. But every small task reminded me of Mark and the life we had built, or thought I had built. The betrayal was everywhere, in every room, in every object I touched. The whispers returned one afternoon as I stood by the window. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, calling me back to the basement. I didn't want to go. The cold, dark room scared me now, but I couldn't ignore the pull. I walked down the stairs slowly, my hands gripping the railing. The air felt heavy, and the faint smell of damp earth filled my nose. I reached the bottom and looked around. The cabinet where I had found the notebook stood open, its contents scattered. I knelt down and sifted through the papers again, searching for something new. As I moved the papers aside, I found an envelope. It was old and yellowed, hidden beneath the pile. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was another letter, but this one was addressed to me. The handwriting was Mark's, and my heart raced as I began to read. The letter was short, but the words were clear. He admitted that he had been keeping secrets. He didn't say much about Clara or the children, but he wrote about feeling trapped, about wanting something different. He said he didn't know how to tell me. The letter made my chest tighten with anger. He had written this to me, but never given it to me. Instead, he had hidden it in the basement, leaving it for me to find only now. The whispers seemed to hum louder around me, their presence thick in the air. I placed the letter on the table and sat on the floor. My hands rested on my knees, and I tried to think. Mark's words felt empty, like an excuse. He had chosen to live two lives, to hurt me and lie to me. I couldn't understand why he had written the letter if he never planned to let me read it. That evening, when Mark came home, I couldn't look at him. His presence filled the house with a weight I couldn't bear. He talked about his day, about work, about things that no longer mattered to me. I nodded and smiled weakly, but my mind was far away. The whispers returned that night, pulling me from my sleep. They were louder than ever, almost urgent. I followed them to the living room, where the air felt colder than before. The fireplace caught my attention again, and I knelt down in front of it. This time, I searched deeper, running my hands over the bricks. Another loose one came free, revealing a small key. It was different from the first one I had found, smaller and more delicate. I held it tightly in my hand, unsure of what had opened. The whispers seemed to guide me toward the office. It was a room I rarely entered, a space that Mark had claimed as his own. My hands trembled as I opened the door. The room was dark and cold, the air thick with dust. I searched the desk first, opening drawers and moving papers aside. The key didn't fit any of the locks there. I turned to the bookshelf, running my hands over the spines of books. Behind one of the shelves, I found a small wooden box. My heart raced as I tried the key. It fit perfectly, and the box clicked open. Inside was a stack of photos, older than the ones I had found before. They showed Mark with Clara again, but these were from years ago. In one, they were standing outside a house, their arms wrapped around each other. In another, Clara was holding a baby, her smile wide and bright. I sat on the floor, staring at the photos. The whispers surrounded me, their sound soft and steady. The truth was clear now. Mark had been with Clara for a long time, long before he met me. This wasn't a recent affair. It was a life he had never left. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. Mark hadn't just lied to me, he had built our life on top of another. Everything I thought we had was a shadow of something else, something I was never meant to see. I put the photos back in the box and closed it. My hands were shaking and my chest felt tight. The whispers seemed to calm now, their sound fading into the background. They had shown me the truth, but I didn't know what to do with it. The next morning, I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. I went for a walk, my feet moving without direction. The cold wind stung my face, but it felt good to be outside. I thought about the life I had shared with Mark, the moments that now felt hollow. The house had revealed so much, but it couldn't tell me what came next. That choice was mine alone. The whispers were quiet now, waiting for me to decide. When I returned home, the house felt different. The silence was almost peaceful, like it was giving me space to think. I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. The truth was out, and it was time to face it. I went to the bedroom and pulled out the letters, the photos, and the receipts. I laid them out on the bed, each piece of evidence, a part of the story. My heart ached as I looked at them, but I felt stronger now. The whispers returned, soft and steady. They didn't guide me this time. Instead, they seemed to ask a simple question: what will you do next? That morning, I sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. The truth was no longer a question. It was all around me. The photos, the letters, and the memories, they painted a picture of a life I no longer recognized. The whispers had led me to this point, but they were silent now, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Mark's lies had built walls around me, trapping me in a life I didn't choose. Now that the walls had cracked, I had to decide whether to rebuild them or let them fall. My hands shook as I picked up the photos and letters from the bed. Each piece of evidence felt heavy, as if it carried all the weight of Mark's betrayal. I spread the items on the dining table, laying them out like pieces of a puzzle. The whispers began again, soft and steady, as if encouraging me to look closer. My fingers brushed over the edges of the photos, the worn paper of the letters, and the smooth surface of the hotel receipt. Each item told a part of the story, but together they revealed something bigger. Mark wasn't just unfaithful, he was living a lie. Clara and the children weren't a secret to him, they were part of his real life. I was the secret, the one hidden behind closed doors and silent nights. The thought made my chest ache, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his choices. If Mark had built a life with Clara, then he had already made his decision. The whispers seemed to agree, their sound growing louder as I reached for the letter he had written to me, but never delivered. I read it again, this time with a different perspective. The words no longer felt like an apology. They felt like an excuse, a way for him to ease his guilt without taking responsibility. My hands trembled as I folded the letter and set it aside. The day passed slowly, each minute feeling heavier than the last. Mark would come home soon, and I would have to face him. The thought filled me with dread, but it also gave me strength. The whispers were quiet now, as if waiting for me to act. When I heard the sound of Mark's car in the driveway, my heart began to race. I stood by the table, my hands resting on the photos and letters. The door opened, and his footsteps echoed in the hallway. He called out, but I didn't answer. He entered the dining room and froze when he saw the table. His eyes moved over the photos and letters, and his face turned pale. The silence between us was heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead I stayed calm. I pointed to the table, letting the evidence speak for itself. Mark's expression changed, shifting from shock to something colder. He didn't try to deny it. He simply stood there, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his lies had finally caught up with him. I walked past him, leaving the room without a word. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom. The whispers followed me, their sound soft and steady, like a quiet encouragement. I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Filling the suitcase was easier than I expected. I took only what I needed, leaving behind the things that no longer mattered. As I packed, I thought about the life I was leaving behind. It wasn't perfect, but it had been mine until Mark's lies had stolen it from me. When I returned to the living room, Mark was still standing by the table. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Guilt? Regret? It didn't matter. The whispers were louder now, urging me forward. I picked up the suitcase and walked to the door. The house felt cold and empty, like it was already letting go of me. The whispers seemed to echo in the walls, their sound growing softer as I stepped outside. The evening air was cool, and the sky was painted with the soft colors of dusk. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing deeply. The whispers faded completely, leaving me alone with the quiet of the night. As I walked down the driveway, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the life I was leaving behind, anger for the betrayal I had endured, but also a sense of freedom. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to choose. I didn't look back as I reached the end of the street. The whispers were gone, but their guidance stayed with me. They had shown me the truth, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The world was wide and open, and I was ready to face it. Mark's lies had broken something inside me, but they had also set me free. I walked forward, leaving the past behind, and stepped into a future that was mine alone. The first few days after leaving felt strange. I stayed at a small hotel on the edge of town, where the rooms were quiet and the windows overlooked a small garden. It was nothing like home, but it felt safe. I spent my time thinking about everything that had happened and trying to decide what to do next. The pain was still fresh. I would wake up in the mornings with a tight feeling in my chest, remembering the betrayal and the life I had left behind. But with each day, the pain started to feel a little less sharp. I told myself that I had made the right choice, even though it was hard. I thought a lot about the whispers and what they had shown me. They had pushed me to see the truth, even when I didn't want to face it. I didn't know why they had been there, but now that I was gone, I didn't hear them anymore. It felt strange at first, but I realized that I didn't need them now. On my third day at the hotel, I decided to call my sister. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years. Life had gotten busy, and I had always told myself that I didn't have the time. Now, I regretted that. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me figure out what to do next. She answered right away, and her voice was warm and familiar. I told her about Mark, about Clara, and about the life I had uncovered. I kept my words simple, sticking to the facts, but I could feel the emotions rising as I spoke. My sister listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me to come and stay with her. It was a relief to hear her say that. I packed my things and left the hotel that same afternoon. The drive to her house took a few hours, but the time passed quickly. I felt lighter as I drove, like the distance between me and the house was helping me breathe more easily. When I arrived, my sister was waiting at the door. She gave me a long hug, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Her house was warm and welcoming, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could relax. The next few weeks were a time of healing. My sister and I spent hours talking about everything: our childhood, our families, and the things we had missed in each other's lives. She reminded me of who I was before I met Mark, and it helped me start to feel like myself again. I also began to think about the future. For years, my life had revolved around Mark and the plans we had made together. Now, those plans were gone, and I had to figure out what I wanted. It was scary to think about starting over, but it was also exciting. One morning, I went for a walk in my sister's neighborhood. The air was crisp and the sun was bright. As I walked, I thought about the person I wanted to become. I didn't want to be someone defined by what had happened to me. I wanted to be stronger, more independent, and more focused on the things that made me happy. I decided to look for a job in a nearby town. I hadn't worked in years, but I felt ready to start again. I updated my resume and applied to a few places. It felt good to take action, to focus on something positive. A week later, I got a call from a local bookstore. They needed someone to help with organizing and running events. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was perfect for me. Books had always been a source of comfort, and I loved the idea of working with them every day. When I started the job, I felt nervous but also excited. The people were kind and the work was rewarding. Each day, I learned something new and felt a little more confident. I started to see myself in a new light, not as someone who had been betrayed, but as someone who had the strength to move forward. I stayed with my sister for a few more months, saving money and building a new routine. Over time, the memories of Mark and the whispers faded. They didn't disappear completely, but they no longer had control over me. I had found a new sense of peace, one that came from within. Eventually, I found a small apartment in the town where I worked. It wasn't much, a single room with a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that felt truly my own. I filled it with plants and books, things that made me happy. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about how far I had come. The whispers had been a strange and unsettling presence in my life, but they had also been a guide. They had pushed me to see the truth, to face the pain, and to make a change. I realized that I didn't need them anymore. I had learned to listen to myself, to trust my own instincts. The life I was building wasn't perfect, but it was honest and it was mine. As the sun set, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought me to a place of strength and clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Mark's betrayal had broken something inside me, but it had also given me the chance to rebuild. I had found freedom, not just from him, but from the doubts and fears that had held me back. I smiled as I sipped my tea, knowing that this was only the beginning of my new story.